Hello, I'm Peter Whittle, and welcome to the New Culture Forum's review of the year. I think you might agree with me that 2020 was one of the worst years that we can remember. Hopefully 2021 will be better in our memory, but we're going to be discussing over the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to be talking about politics, about the royal family, about the culture wars, about sport, and see if we can make some sort of an idea of the themes which have emerged this year, other than, of course, the one that's overriding, which is the pandemic. I'm very pleased that we've got special guests in Harry Miller, who's the founder of We Are Fair COP, and I'm sure you know various things that he's been up to over the past year. He's been on the show a number of times. And also from this manor, I'm very pleased we have Emma Webb, who's also works for the Free Speech Union, and indeed Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, who has been on GB News a fair amount talking about royal matters. But of course you obviously know him from the New Culture Forum. I want to start because let's start with some good news. Harry, we've talked about this on the channel, this week, but you scored a real victory for free speech. And I just wanted to start really by, first of all, congratulating you again because of the Court of Appeal ruling. But also, where do you think we stand now with free speech? Are we in a better place than we were a year ago?
We are in so much a better place. Yet again, the Court of Appeal has repeated what was said at the High Court in the previous year. That speech which is offensive, distasteful, these are fundaments of a democratic and a free society. And just because we are being a little bit obtuse or a little bit offensive or what have you, this is not it's not a legitimate police practice to try and shut down our speech in any way whatsoever. The mere recording of us for non-crime hate incidents because we've said something that the police didn't like or that somebody was offended by, the Court of Appeal has finally ruled that this activity is unlawful and therefore the police have to stop it. So I'm really, really encouraged about the prospects for 2022. And I intend to go out and exercise this newfound freedom by being as controversial as humanly possible and by saying things which were unsayable yesterday and have been unsayable since 2014. Because my conviction is we either use it or we lose it, and we cannot afford to lose it.
Well, look, Emma, can I come to you there? I mean, are you going to start being more controversial now? Not that you're not anyway, but will you be?
Well, I already say everything that I think, so it's unlikely that I'm going to be saying anything more controversial than I already say publicly. But I think that this is, firstly, I just want to say my congratulations to Harry. The whole country owes you its thanks because this is a really serious landmark ruling. And it does mean that, as Toby Young, the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, pointed out, it does mean that people can rest easy in their beds at night knowing they're not going to get a knock on the door from the police coming to police their tweets. This is important. Important in many respects. It's important for policing because it means that the police should really be encouraged to focus on policing our streets instead of our tweets, doing what they're actually supposed to be doing, like things like solving burglaries, which the stats show they haven't been particularly good at doing. But also it does mean that people can feel free to make jokes and know that those are not things that are going to end up on their permanent records as non-crime hate incidents, that this isn't something that should be showing up in an advanced DBS check. It's not something that should affect people's lives when they haven't committed any crime at all. As the name suggests, the Orwellian name implies, these are not crimes. And so this is such an important ruling. It can't be emphasised enough.
Rafe, I was going to ask you there, carrying on from that, is that this ruling came out of Harry campaigning. It basically came from outside the political sphere I mean, would you say they still have no real appreciation, the political class, of the importance of these issues that we talk about so much on this channel?
Absolutely, they remain out of touch. I mean, they remain in their rainbow ivory towers. But this is, news that should warm the cockles of every British heart. And so I also want to give my congratulations to Harry and to say thank you to Harry for giving us all in this country an early Christmas present, because this is truly fantastic news, and it does show that there is a fight back beginning. It's one of the few bright spots in an otherwise very bleak, dire year, I should say. We've seen a few of these. We've seen the success that we've had ourselves with our own campaign group, Save Our Statues, in rallying people to save statues. It's also, I think, one of those periods now where you're beginning to see grassroots movements develop, and news like Harry's can only embolden that further. And in fact, you're seeing some effect of this. For example, Jordan Peterson has been invited back to Cambridge University, having been cancelled. The government seems to realise how important this is in terms of its own base, and so moves have been taken to try to protect university academics against cancel culture for being cancelled for what they're doing. And I suppose most importantly in this context, we've finally seen a movement against the radical extremist agenda of Stonewall, and we've seen so many of Stonewall's partners finally begin to realise that something smells rotten and remove their partnership, and indeed, most importantly, remove their funding for it. And much of this, of course, can be tied back to issues like Harry's.
Yeah, I think, Harry, we were talking before when you were on the show earlier about Stonewall, and basically it's sort of become emblematic, hasn't it, Stonewall, of this whole thing? I mean, this extraordinary influence of people suddenly waking up saying, how come this body, this lobby group, has somehow or other got its sort of claws into virtually every institution and, well, company and everything? But it's sort of on the way down, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it got in on the back of corporate guilt. Yeah. Certainly with the police felt so guilty, I think, about their attitude, the attitudes which were exposed during the Macpherson report and their past history of homophobia, that they just simply jumped on the next sort of train out of town that looked like it might be going to Woke City. I think that's what they did. But of course it was wrong, because Stonewall, whilst when they began, no doubt they started with the correct intentions and did a lot of good stuff. But like a lot of organisations, they ended up becoming entirely corrupt, politically, intellectually corrupt. Yeah. And as a result, the association with the various police forces has corrupted the police forces. And Stonewall they've placed a chilling effect on police forces. They've placed a chilling effect throughout HR departments across the country. And what this ruling does that we got yesterday from the Court of Appeal, we're turning that back on them now. We're saying that you're the ones who need to feel the chill. You feel the chilling effect from this ruling. Yeah. And I was only half joking when I came out to the Court of Appeal yesterday and said, from now on, we're the ones who knock. We are the danger. Because it's true. I am a common man. I am the person on the Clapham omnibus. And when you attempt that kind of overreach again, I will be knocking on your door. And if need be, I will drag you, Chief Constables, through the court on behalf of the common man.
It would be nice, would it not? This is something that we've talked about again a lot on the channel. It would be nice, would it not, if, say, the Prime Minister or a senior figure, well, not have just congratulated you, but actually remarked in a favourable way on it, because that would lay a marker down for people who feel that they basically don't really have a grip on this sort of thing.
I think they should, but I don't think they will. I think what Priti Patel has done specifically is let me do her dirty work. She's let me, an ordinary citizen, risk my life, risk my home, risk my savings to do work which she should have done. In effect, she subcontracted it out without payment. Let me take the risk. And now she will go, well, of course, this is what we wanted all along, but being the Home Secretary, I couldn't possibly interfere. Yeah. That's what will happen. And I think all of the government ministers will do the same. Quietly, privately, they're celebrating, publicly, I don't think they'll say a word.
Well, talking of private celebrations, we've ended the year on a whole flurry of these revelations. I mean, I wonder, Emma, and Rafe as well, what's your view on the general political situation, in the sense that it seems to be one of utter chaos? When you think of 2 years ago when Boris was elected, there was a sort of sense, was there not, of possible hope. I mean, people allowed themselves a bit of possible hope. Do you think it's as bad as it looks from the outside, Rafe?
I think it's beyond sad, it's depressing, and indeed it's actually tragic, because I feel that we really have lost a golden opportunity, perhaps, a once in a lifetime opportunity, to reverse the long march through the institutions that we've seen over the past 20 years. The Tory party wasted the years from 2010 to 2019, first under the coalition, but then under David Cameron, that very weak, vacuous leader who essentially continued very much a Blair-light government. And so we had, of course, as we've seen, no change on immigration, despite Tory promises in each manifesto to reduce immigration. We've seen the continuing leftist advance through our academic institutions, most crucially the teacher training, which of course affects our children, and indeed the stuffing of quangos and institutions with far left activists at the very top of the pyramid. And the hope was that, Dominic Cummings really fully understood all of these issues and understood that the voter base that was going to secure the Tories' power for the next decade were in fact those red wall voters who were socially conservative. This was going to be the great realignment around culture rather than economics. For those red wall voters for whom patriotism, decency, family values were far more important than economic ideology. And this was supposed to essentially set the course for the next decade, having Boris Johnson as the great communicator, able to speak to the masses, with behind him the master of the dark arts, ensuring that a proper structured agenda of reform was implemented. And because of Mrs. Johnson, dare I say, in large part, Carrie Antoinette, we've seen this complete dismantling of that fine structure behind Boris Johnson. And so many of the scandals we've seen in recent months have been because he doesn't have a team around him who are strong enough to advise him or to whom he'll listen to. But he had that with Dominic Cummings, Lee Kane, all of the individuals who Carrie Simons got rid of. Some of our viewers may remember the American horror film Carrie in the 1970s. Well, if you're working in the Tory party, I think Mrs. Johnson's tenure in Downing Street could be seen as a sequel to that horror film, Carrie Part 2.
Yeah, Rafe, the thing is, also there's this sort of sense in which, for many people who were a little bit on the fence about Boris, thinking, oh, well, actually, maybe there's more to him than we thought. And, but this year is actually, well, maybe he's been showing his own feet of clay or his true colours. You never particularly had much faith in him, did you?
I've never liked Boris Johnson. I've never trusted Boris Johnson. I've always known that he's completely a self-propagandist and self-aggrandizer who's simply in love with the idea of power. And in fact, when he all the time through his tenure as London mayor, each time there was mayor's questions, you could see that he had no command of details. He didn't know how many houses were built. He didn't know what the crime figures were, what the unemployment figures were. He had absolutely no control over any of the departments of which he was responsible. And I was amazed at how many senior journalists and others said, oh, this is just a front. He's actually a very clever man. Look, the ability to quote things in Latin and know about classics doesn't make you suited to be prime minister. It's a very slim show of intelligence. And but what I did realize was, okay, this is clearly a liberal. I don't think he's a Brexiteer either. I think he's deep down, he's a Remainer. But he wants to stay in power, and he knew that to stay in power, he had to actually address the real needs of the British public. And as I say, people like Dominic Cummings did understand and did know. So I was content at the very beginning to have him there, so long as he was being guided and directed by someone who knew what was going on. But now, absent Dominic Cummings, we're seeing exactly what sort of a a catastrophe his leadership is and will remain, I think.
Harry, what's your attitude to Boris Johnson? Do you have one?
Yeah, I think Boris Johnson is a man without a backbone and without a single principle in his body. That's my assessment of Boris Johnson. The way he's handled his government over the whole COVID crisis, so-called crisis, absolutely, utterly stinks. This whole one rule for them, one rule for us. It's hypocritical. The way they behave with COP26, where they stick on masks for the cameras, and then the second they think the cameras are switched off, they start mingling and all the rest of it. But as far as I'm concerned, he's part of this ridiculous elite that includes Barack Obama and all the people who flew out for his birthday party, and again who, for the cameras, were wearing masks, and the second that they were inside a marquee, were dancing like there was no tomorrow and no social distancing, because these people don't believe what they tell us, and it's that I can't forgive. They simply don't believe anything that they tell us.
Yes. You mentioned Barack Obama there. Biden has been pretty much like that too, I would say. I mean, it's kind of what we seem to have are, as you say, an elite class, but incredibly weak too.
Oh yeah, it is. They're elite and they're weak and they're hypocritical. But what's worse is they take us for absolute fools. That's what I can't stand. They take us for fools. This is a case of, we all understand that billionaires are going to billionaire. We recognise that they're going to fly out on their helicopters to their billionaire yachts and all the rest of it. But it's when they fly off the billionaire yachts to tell us all that we're destroying the planet if we jump on an EasyJet to Magaluf, that we think, well, hold on a minute. This is entirely wrong. So this is a case of let them eat cake, as far as I can see. And we know that when you keep telling the populace, let them eat cake, and start behaving with that sort of elitist hypocrisy that they do, that quite frankly, revolution is not far off.
Would you agree with that, Emma?
I think Rafe and Harry have both touched on something very important. Rafe said that it was tragic. I think this has really been a year of disappointment for those who supported the Conservative Party just before the 2019 elections, because as Rafe has described, hopes were so high. And as Harry just touched on there, I think, there were real hopes that Boris had an ability to connect with the majority of people, the common man, the people who hold socially conservative views in some respects, economically moderate views in others. And Boris has really shown himself to be almost like the Russian Tsar, or, as Rafe mentioned, Carrie Antoinette, has shown himself to be like King Louis, so detached from the thinking of the common man, and has really squandered that opportunity to have that common touch. And I think that there will be many people who had supported the Conservative Party who now not only are feeling politically homeless and disappointed, but will be looking at this as being an historically squandered opportunity for, as we were talking about before COVID, that great realignment that people had hoped for. And I find it very difficult to see how the Conservative Party will really ever be able to row back to that, partly because, and COVID amongst other things, they've shown themselves to, or in many cases, particularly within the leadership, to not have that ethical, moral backbone, that sensitivity on moral and ethical questions that are so deeply ingrained in our cultural roots that the normal people, the man that you meet on the street, takes for granted. They don't seem to share those instincts, and I find it very difficult to see how they can connect with those grassroots without sharing those instincts.
And the reason I think this is such a tragedy is because the Tory party actually has changed. This is such a different Conservative Party on the ground and in Parliament compared to previous governments and previous decades. You really do have working class people who have really, done so much to enshrine and embody Conservative values, who came in with the last election with a real hope to enact reform, to truly level up their regions, and to see this image of the nasty party return solely because of the actions of that tiny coterie who live in this Versailles court at Downing Street. Just to see this this superficial, 0.1% or whatever of the true Tory party, who are these elite Eton boys, besmirch the reputations and the image of the Tory party when it has gone through so much to change and transform. That's what I think is truly tragic.
I wanted to turn, while we're on the subject of weakness and disappointment, obviously, Biden came in this year. For me, that withdrawal from Afghanistan was particularly depressing. I remember reaching a low point because I just thought, here we have the West, on the whole, appearing to want to commit suicide internally, and then this happens, which took me back. It was far worse, actually, but it took me back to the days of Carter and the Iranian hostages. I mean, is that what you thought about it?
I agree entirely. It was absolute abject cowardice on Biden's part. It reminds me very much of how we treated the Gurkhas. We expect people to cooperate with us, to fight with us, because we persuade them that they're in part of a just cause, and then when it suits us, we drop them like hot potatoes, and that's simply wrong. It's unconscionably wrong.
But there were sort of also these terrible images, if you remember, of Biden, sort of losing his way. The very time when I was thinking, what I wouldn't give to have like even Reagan there,
Oh yeah.
It was this sort of sense of we've fallen so far. This guy can barely even sort of string two words together.
Well, the problem is he hated Trump more than he loves decency. And so whatever Trump was doing, whatever Trump endorsed, he was going to do the opposite, and to hell with the consequences. And again, in a politician, particularly when it's the most powerful man on the planet, that is simply unforgivable.
Speaking of decency, but I speak as a strong and unflinching monarchist here, it seems to me that the Queen has carried on pretty much as she always has. And of course, we lost Prince Philip this year. Rafe, I want to ask you, because obviously you are a royal commentator too. The Queen lost Prince Philip this year. Some people, though, have been talking about this as another annus horribilis for the royal family. Would you go along with that? Or it seems to me personally that it hasn't quite been anything like as bad as the 1990s. But what's your view on it?
Yes, well, I actually think next year is going to be the Queen's second annus horribilis d'or. 1992 was the first one, and next year, of course, marks the 30th anniversary of that. Now, 1992, Windsor Castle had burnt down, and 3 of her children separated, got divorced. Next year, although it is the year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, I think a large part of the year is going to be spent dealing with Prince Harry's memoir, which is going to be extremely controversial. Imagine doing that to your grandmother in the groundbreaking, record-breaking 70th year of your reign. What a wonderful present to give to your beloved grandmother, is that disgraceful book that's coming out. Then also we have The Crown, releasing perhaps its final series, but this series deals with the 1990s, the most difficult and embarrassing decade for the royal family. And that, of course, will be a several-week saga. And, of course, as we know, their accuracy and adhesion to the truth leaves a lot to be desired. But many people around the world, particularly in America, Australia, Canada, take what the Crown says as a gospel, true-to-life documentary telling. And then, of course, we have the civil lawsuit case against Prince Andrew, which is taking place in America. So that's all going to be present. COVID will still be present. We don't know whether the Platinum Jubilee actually will provide the nation with a chance to actually show their love, support and admiration for the Queen, as we saw with the Diamond Jubilee in 2012 and the Golden Jubilee in 2002. So we do have a situation where we could have muted celebrations of the Queen's 70 years on the throne and then these high-profile scandals. So it's a continuation of the dire year that this has been with Prince Harry and Meghan and all the events of this year. But I'll just say, the Oprah Winfrey story interview was in January, so where we had Harry the Bad starting the year, and at least we have Harry the Good here, with Harry Miller ending the year on a positive note, because we have to remember that Harry and Meghan's efforts are indeed to stifle the free press and also to ensure that people's freedom online to express themselves are also circumvented. So Harry has actually struck a blow against Harry and Meghan too with this court ruling.
Emma, Rafe was mentioning Harry and Meghan there. This year, of course, we had this huge interview with Oprah Winfrey. This was back, I believe, in April, I think, sometime. And it seemed to, have all the kind of elements that were going to be utterly destructive. What was your feeling when you watched that interview?
I think it was a horrendous betrayal of the Queen and of the monarchy, and an insult to the British people as well. And obviously, in the days and months that followed, it became quite clear that there were an awful lot of untruths, shall we say, in that interview. And I think, as Rafe has said, this was the way that we began the year, and it's only seems to have escalated since, with Harry and Meghan showing themselves not only to be unpopular here in the UK, but also increasingly unpopular in the United States as well. This doesn't seem to have been a particularly good move for them. Their organisation has partnered with other organisations, and as Rafe has said, they have not been particularly pro-free speech themselves, or pro-free press. And I think Rafe is absolutely right in pointing to next year as being even worse than this year for the monarchy. And I'm personally very concerned about the future of the monarchy, not only with it resting in Prince Charles's hands, but obviously with the death of Prince Philip, which was a really historic moment in the past year. I'm concerned about the how safe the monarchy is in the hands of future generations, and I would like to hope that things will be better in the long term. But as Rafe said, in the short term, it's looking very bleak indeed.
Do you share that bleakness, Harry? I mean, or do you care?
Oh, I do care. I'm like you. I am an unflinching royalist. I absolutely love the Queen. Loved Prince Philip. Loved a lot of them. Loved Harry and Meghan as well. I was absolutely thrilled to watch the royal wedding and cheer. And I took my kids to William's wedding. I love it, and I find the betrayal by Harry, my namesake, to be just treasonable. I mean, off with his head, quite frankly. But also, I think that the way Boris Johnson and our government used the Queen as a COVID prop at the wedding, at the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, I will never, ever forgive that. Seeing the Queen sitting there alone at her moment of need, whilst Boris Johnson and his cronies were sitting around having business meetings with cheese and wine and hosting quiz afternoons and all the rest of it. I will never forgive them for that. Never.
Yeah, I think that picture is one of the pictures of the year. I think that, it's so stark, isn't it? We're sitting at the end of the road there in St George's Chapel. I mean, but do you share Emma's sort of fears for the future of the thing? Because most people hugely admire and respect the Queen. In fact, I'd say it goes further than that now. I think that they feel extremely fond of her, love her. But that's slightly different, isn't it, to the actual institution?
Yeah, well, I quite like Prince Charles, and I think he'll be an all right king, actually. I don't, he annoys me with his pronouncements on the environment and all that kind of stuff, but we're used to that. We know, and it'll be a relatively short reign. But I quite like him, and I have a lot of hope for his son. I think we're in fairly safe hands, quite honestly.
Yes, I agree with that. I think William and Kate have sort of come through this year brilliantly. And when I see them, I sort of think I really would like, regardless of the mental health thing and the climate change and all of that, I sort of think I would actually be quite happy if you were representing us as the first ambassadors, which is what they really are.
Yeah, and I think Charles knows well enough that once he becomes we rather than he and becomes the king, I think he will shut up on the more controversial issues. But I think it's been fine actually, because he's spent a long time waiting to be king, hasn't he? So we have to forgive his little digressions into sort of semi-environmental lunacy. I can forgive him that, because fundamentally I like him.
Well, look, it's customary on these sort of review programs, at least in the old legacy media, to round off with sport. I've got a suspicion that Harry's pretty good on sport, but I'm hopeless. But I did want to ask people what if they had a sort of sporting moment. We've had the Olympics, we had triumphs in tennis and in boxing, different people. I want to ask, Emma, can I start with you? I don't know whether you are a sports fan, but is there something from the sporting world that kind of fixes in your mind from this year?
I'm not a sporting fan, and I can't pretend that I've actually really seen anything this year that particularly stands out to me. But as someone who doesn't watch sport, and I guess on behalf of all those who don't, there was one thing that it was impossible to miss this year, and that was Emma Raducanu's victory in the tennis. I remember I was in a pub when that happened, and especially with all of the situations surrounding COVID and, this pub that I was in, the atmosphere was absolutely electric, and the collective celebrations over Emma Raducanu's victory has stuck with me as being something that was incredibly special. It managed to bring the country together in a way that I haven't seen since before COVID. And for that atmosphere alone, that's something that stands out to me. But it's possible that that's only because I haven't been paying very much attention.
Rafe, anything particularly for you? I would just sort of also add that, whether that was the tennis triumph or indeed in the Euros, they tended to get sort of, for me, a little bit tarnished, because they also tended to be used to prove different political points, didn't they? We saw this in the Euros. That sort of descended in the end, and what was a wonderful thing sort of became about something else. But do you have anything particularly memorable from the sporting world?
No, I was going to say, I've never watched the Euros before. The only football I ever watched was the World Cup usually, but I watched the Euros for the first time. And it was good to see the positivity that the England team generated at first. And I really did think it was a lovely ability to show the power that sport does have to bring a nation together. It's one of those things like the monarchy, when you have a coronation or a royal wedding, or you have your team in the finals, it does provide those all too rare nowadays moments to actually see some sort of social cohesion. But as you say, marred and tarnished in so many ways and on so many levels, be it with the taking of the knee, the unbelievable wokery in the England team, trying to prove that this is multiracial Britain working perfectly, and then all the nonsense about the Marcus Rashford mural, which was alleged to be racist, with major headlines, and then when it was found out not to be racist, barely a headline to be seen reporting that, and then of course this absolute nonsense that England is a racist country is because of racist tweets that were sent to the England players and the England team, despite the fact that there were fewer than 2,000 racist tweets out of 6 million tweets sent in the whole year. There was a study done. So out of 6 million tweets, they managed to find fewer than 2,000. And of those, that they identified 360 accounts. So 360 accounts out of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of accounts. Now, it's impossible to eradicate racism in any country, but I would say England is probably top of the pile for being the least racist if you look at that as a percentage of the population.
This is something that seems to have carried on this year, and that is that basically the culture war, politics, call it what you want, now sort of pervades almost every aspect of life. And So we just talk about sport there, but it sort of has come into just every area. You think this is not going to be nice and straightforward. This is just not going to be. We're going to somehow lose this to the culture war. Do you feel that?
No, I don't think we're going to lose at all. But then I'm an optimist, Peter.
No, lose it to the culture war. I mean, in the sense, I know I'm an optimist too, but I mean, things that were not political particularly before, certainly not things that you'd have to worry about or be nuanced about. These now have all been affected by the same kind of thing.
Yeah, they have. But I think people are afraid. You know, footballers are afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of not taking the knee. They're afraid. Or everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid, because you can guarantee this: what they say privately on their WhatsApp groups, or what they say down at the pub, or what they say when they have a party around the pool, will be entirely different from how they present when the cameras are watching them. And what we need to do is close that gap.
Yeah.
So your life on WhatsApp is as valid as your life in front of a camera. That's and I believe that's possible to happen. I think that can happen. By the way, my sporting highlight this year was, regardless of the politics, England getting to a final. Absolutely love them.
Yeah.
And my sporting low was the way that Lewis Hamilton was robbed of an 8th world title by the evil conspirators of Formula One. There you go.
Right, well, can't really compete with that. Harry, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thanks very much, Emma. Thanks very much, Rafe. As you can see, I mean, obviously we believe in traditions on this channel, and we have here, if you can see, this rather beautiful nativity scene. I actually haven't sort of had one, at home or whatever, since I was a child, I think. Anyway, this is the New Culture Forums one. It's absolutely lovely, isn't it? I do hope that you have a happy Christmas, or at least as happy as it can be. And we will be going with our shows over the next couple of weeks. So all the very best to you. And thank you very, very much for all the support you've given us this year. Thank you very much. Good night.